On Thursday, U.S. President Joe Biden essentially issued an ultimatum to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Either safeguard Gaza's civilian population and international humanitarian workers, or Washington may withhold its support for Israel's military campaign against Hamas militants. The letter came following an Israeli attack that killed 7 World Central Kitchen, WCK, relief workers and incited international indignation, and came months after the United States demanded that Israel alter its war methods that have murdered tens of thousands of Palestinians. Israel admits the strike was a mistake, and the White House has not specified specific steps for Netanyahu. Analysts suggest the implicit threat is to slow U.S. arms transfers to Israel or temper U.S. support at the UN. U.S. President Biden is threatening to condition military assistance to meet humanitarian needs in the Palestinian conflict, despite balancing pressure from progressive Democrats and the risk of alienating pro-Israel independent voters. The White House and U.S. Secretary of State have called for Israel to implement specific steps to address civilian harm, humanitarian suffering, and aid worker safety. The U.S. policy on Gaza will be determined by Israel's immediate action. The Israeli government announced steps to increase aid flows to Gaza, but it remains unclear if these steps will satisfy U.S. demands. The Biden administration has increased pressure on Israel to consider alternatives to a ground offensive in Rafah, southern Gaza. A 30-minute call between Biden and Netanyahu was tense, with Biden expressing concerns and Netanyahu defending his approach. A senior White House official called for a comprehensive plan to prevent further attacks on humanitarian aid workers and civilians. Biden may have reached his limit in U.S. support for Israel, as the domestic and international costs of supporting Israel's campaign in Gaza outweighed the benefits of its ground-level achievements. If Israel doesn't meet Biden's conditions, the U.S. may negotiate a UN Security Council resolution, potentially leaving Israel vulnerable to attacks by Hezbollah or other Iranian proxies. Biden may have telegraphed his thinking last month. Biden's lack of assurances about offensive weapons raises speculation about imposing conditions on arms transfers to Israel, which heavily relies on U.S. arms. Jonathan Panikoff suggests Biden may limit smaller military items and take further measures against extremist Jewish settlers involved in Palestinian attacks.
President Joe Biden, for the first time since the start of the war in Gaza, threatened to condition support for Israel's offensive there, saying U.S. policy could change if Israel doesn't take concrete steps to protect civilians and aid workers. Biden's warning follows an Israeli airstrike that killed 7 aid workers and was relayed during a phone call on Thursday with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
We've gone from a hug to a handshake to a slap on the wrist today.
Laura Blumenfeld, a senior fellow at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, said it marks the first time Biden has sought to leverage U.S. aid to influence Israeli military behavior.
Look, this is tough. It's Biden on a tightrope with no net. He's caught in political crosswinds. From the left wing of his party, they're saying condition aid, remove yourself from your all-out support for Israel. And then from the right, especially in Congress, the Republicans are threatening to blast him because they'll accuse him of weakness. I think the most important thing here is to set clear red lines. So if Biden can say, here are the lines, do not cross them, there will be consequences, that gives him credibility and leverage and leadership.
The White House had described Biden as outraged by the attack that killed World Central Kitchen aid workers.
Systematically, car by car.
The group's founder, celebrity chef Jose Andres, told Reuters in an interview Wednesday that the attack had targeted his aid workers deliberately.
Israel must meet this moment.
In Brussels, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the attack on aid workers this week must be the last, and that humanitarian aid must be surged into Gaza.
If we don't see the changes that we need to see, there'll be changes in our own policy.
At the White House, spokesperson John Kirby declined to elaborate on what specific changes the U.S. would make to its policy toward Israel and Gaza, but said the U.S. expected to see an announcement from Israel on steps it's taking to protect civilians and aid workers in the coming hours and days.
We want to see that even as the Israelis work through their investigation, that they are willing and able to take practical, immediate steps to protect aid workers on the ground and to demonstrate that they have that civilian harm mitigation in place.
Israel said on Thursday it would adjust tactics in the Gaza war, after describing the attack as the result of a misidentification, and that findings from an investigation would be made public soon.
Fast food giant McDonald's is to buy back all its Israeli restaurants following a boycott of the brand in response to the Israel-Hamas war. The company said it had reached an agreement with franchisee Alonial for the return of 225 outlets across the country employing 5,000 people. McDonald's was criticized after Alonial started giving away thousands of free meals to Israeli soldiers. Sales in the region have slumped since the conflict began in October. On Thursday, McDonald's said a deal had been signed with Alonial, which has been running the chain of Golden Arches in Israel for more than 30 years. The U.S. company said the restaurants, operations, and employees would be retained on equivalent terms, and that it remained committed to the Israeli market. Terms of the sale were not revealed. The boycott was sparked after Muslim-majority countries such as Kuwait, Malaysia, and Pakistan issued statements distancing themselves from the firm for its perceived support of Israel. Fast food giant McDonald's is to buy back all its Israeli restaurants following a boycott of the brand in response to the Israel-Hamas war. The company said it had reached an agreement with franchisee Alonial for the return of 225 outlets across the country employing 5,000 people. McDonald's was criticized after Alonial started giving away thousands of free meals to Israeli soldiers. Sales in the region have slumped since the conflict began in October. On Thursday, McDonald's said a deal had been signed with Alonial, which has been running the chain of Golden Arches in Israel for more than 30 years. The U.S. company said the restaurants, operations, and employees would be retained on equivalent terms, and that it remained committed to the Israeli market. Terms of the sale were not revealed. The boycott was sparked after Muslim-majority countries such as Kuwait, Malaysia, and Pakistan issued statements distancing themselves from the firm for its perceived support of Israel. Vocal protests were staged worldwide as the grassroots boycott spread beyond the Middle East. In January, the global food chain admitted the conflict had meaningfully impacted its performance, with business in France, Indonesia, and Malaysia suffering, although its trade in the Middle East was worst affected. Chief Executive Chris Kempczynski blamed the backlash on misinformation, but it hit the bottom line nonetheless, and the company missed its first quarterly sales target in nearly 4 years. The boycott was described as disheartening and ill-founded by McDonald's. The company relies on thousands of independent businesses to own and operate most of its more than 40,000 stores around the world. About 5% are located in the Middle East. In every country where we operate, including in Muslim countries, McDonald's is proudly represented by local owner-operators, Mr. Kempczynski said at the time. So long as this war is going on, we're not expecting to see any significant improvement in these markets, the McDonald's boss added. The company will be hoping that by taking the Israeli business back in-house, it can restore its reputation in the Middle East and meet its key sales targets once more.